My daughter-in-law poured the tea herself. I was updating my will. The gardener leaned in and whispered, "Please don't drink that." I switched cups quietly. 10 minutes later, she collapsed. If that made your stomach drop, stay with me. And tell me honestly in the comments, would you have trusted that cup? And if stories like this pull you in, you might want to stick around. I share situations like this more often than you'd think. I was sitting at my desk because it felt like the right time. I'm 72 years old, widowed, born and raised in Ohio. I've lived in the same house for more than 40 years, the one I raised my son in, the one I paid off myself. I've always handled my own affairs, quietly, carefully. For most of my working life, I dealt with paperwork most people avoid: records, signatures, disputes that start with smiles and end in silence. I learned early that when money gets involved, people don't always get aggressive. Sometimes they get polite, attentive, helpful. Last year I had a small health scare, nothing dramatic, no sirens. Just enough doctor visits to remind me I wasn't invincible. My son suggested I get my paperwork in order, reasonable advice. His wife agreed a little too fast. Almost overnight, she became attentive, calling more. Dropping by without warning, offering help with paperwork she'd never cared about before, talking about peace of mind, about making things easier for everyone. I didn't argue, I didn't explain myself. Instead, I met privately with my attorney and began revising my will quietly. No family meeting, no announcements, just documents, signatures, and a locked drawer in my desk. The afternoon of the tea, I was reviewing the final draft at home. She insisted on stopping by. Said she was worried I'd forget to eat, said she'd make me something warm. She poured the tea herself, chamomile, honey. A lemon slice placed just right, like presentation mattered. That's when Miguel stepped inside. Miguel had worked my land for 11 years, trimmed hedges, fixed irrigation, never once crossed the threshold of my house. But that day he stood frozen in the doorway, clippers still in his hand, eyes locked on the cup. He didn't look at her, he looked at me. "Please," he whispered. "Ma'am, don't drink that." I didn't gasp, I didn't accuse anyone. I adjusted my glasses and slid the saucer an inch across the desk. She, distracted, nudged her own cup closer without thinking. We reached for the cups nearest our hands. We drank. Minutes passed. Her words slowed. Her smile faltered. She blinked hard and reached for the edge of the desk like the room had tilted. Then she collapsed. The clippers hit the floor. The teacup shattered. Papers scattered. Someone shouted. Someone else called for help. And I stayed exactly where I was, finally understanding that this had nothing to do with kindness or concern or tea. It was about timing, and the gardener knew something I didn't yet. What he saw and why he spoke up that day changed everything that came next. Because the truth is, the tea wasn't the first warning, it was just the last one I almost ignored. Before that morning, my life had a rhythm: wake up early, coffee by the window, a slow walk through the house while the day was still quiet. I liked things that way: predictable, steady, nothing rushed. After my husband passed, I learned how valuable calm really is. Updating my will wasn't a big emotional moment, it was practical. A box you check before life decides to check it for you. I'd put it off for years, not because I was afraid, but because everything already felt settled. The house was paid for. The accounts were simple. There was no chaos to clean up until there was. The first thing that changed wasn't the paperwork, it was the attention. My daughter-in-law started showing up more often. At first, it felt harmless. A quick stop with muffins, a phone call asking how I was feeling. Little things that made sense if you squinted at them just right, but the timing was interesting. Every visit seemed to line up with something important: mail from my attorney, documents laid out on the desk, phone calls I took in the other room. She'd linger longer than usual, eyes drifting to folders she pretended not to notice. She never asked directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she'd phrase things gently. "Have you thought about making things simpler? You don't want anyone confused later. Paperwork can be overwhelming at this stage." That last one stuck with me. People who care about you don't talk around you like you're already fading. Still, I didn't confront her. I didn't pull back either. I've learned that silence makes people reveal more than arguments ever do. So I listened. I watched. I took mental notes. That's when I decided to keep my attorney meetings private. No updates, no casual mentions, no details shared over dinner. I kept everything locked away, literally and figuratively. The more I stayed quiet, the more eager she became. Helpful suggestions turned into gentle nudges. Gentle nudges turned into reminders, always polite, always smiling, and always just a little too interested. The gardener noticed it too. Miguel didn't say anything at first, he never did. But I saw the way his eyes followed her car when she pulled into the driveway, the way he'd slow down his work when she was around, pretending to adjust something while listening. Some people watch to judge, others watch to protect. The morning of the signing felt different before anyone even spoke. The house was still, but the air felt tight, like something was holding its breath. I laid the documents out neatly, aligned the pages, uncapped the pen. That's when she offered to make tea, not asked, offered. "I've got it," she said, already moving toward the kitchen. I remember thinking it was strange how determined she sounded about something so small. How she insisted on bringing it herself instead of letting me get it like I always did. Little things start to stack up when you stop brushing them aside. By the time she set the cup in front of me, I already knew this wasn't just about being helpful. It was about control, about being present at the exact right moment, and I realized something else too. Whatever she thought was about to happen that day, she wanted witnesses to believe it was normal. Because when someone tries that hard to look calm, it's usually because they're hiding how desperate they really are. After that, I stopped treating Claire's visits as harmless, not because she'd done anything loud, but because nothing about her timing felt accidental anymore. She didn't show up randomly. She showed up around moments, doctor appointments, bank letters, mail from my attorney, days when paperwork sat out instead of locked away, days when decisions lived on the surface instead of in drawers. Once I noticed that, I couldn't unsee it. She started asking questions that didn't sound like questions. "Did you ever finish updating those documents? Did your lawyer say anything about beneficiaries? Do things still automatically go to Michael if something happens?" Always casual. Always said with a smile. Always followed by something sweet: soup, muffins, a blanket over my shoulders like I was already fading. I answered carefully, or not at all. And the more neutral I became, the more she filled the silence herself. She talked about estate taxes, about probate nightmares she'd heard about from friends, about families torn apart when people didn't plan ahead. She never mentioned money directly, that would have been crude. Instead, she talked about burdens, about how hard it would be on Michael if things weren't clear. Michael, meanwhile, grew quieter, not defensive, just absent. He'd sit at the table scrolling his phone while Claire spoke for both of them. When I asked him something directly, he'd glance at her before answering, like he was checking notes. That was new. I raised him to look people in the eye. One afternoon, I tested something small. I left a manila folder on my desk empty, except for a sticky note that read, "Final will nothing inside, just air and paper." Claire noticed it within minutes. She didn't touch it. She didn't ask about it right away. She poured herself coffee, walked around the room, commented on the weather. Then, as if it had just occurred to her, she said, "Oh, are you finally done with everything?" I smiled. Almost, her shoulders relaxed, just a fraction, like someone who'd been holding their breath. That's when I knew this wasn't curiosity, it was monitoring. A week later, Miguel asked if he could talk to me. That alone caught my attention. In 11 years, he'd never asked for anything beyond where to plant or what needed trimming. He stood outside on the back patio, hat in his hands, eyes fixed on the ground. "I don't want to cause problems," he said. "But I need to tell you something." I waited. "She's been asking me questions," he continued, "about your routines, about when you're alone, about whether you take anything in your tea." That last part landed heavy. I asked him when. "Every time she comes by," he said. "She asks it like she's joking, like she's being thoughtful." He finally looked up at me then, and maybe it's nothing, but I didn't like how specific she was. Neither did I. Still, I didn't confront Claire, I didn't warn Michael, I didn't change my behavior, I changed my access. I locked files I'd never locked before, switched which cabinet held what. Took my will out of the house entirely and stored it in my attorney's safe. And I watched. Claire grew sharper, not mean, just impatient. Her kindness started arriving with expiration dates, help that soured if it wasn't rewarded. Smiles that tightened when I said I was still thinking. The day of the tea, she was unusually calm, too calm, like someone who believed the waiting was finally over. And Miguel was watching her hands the entire time. What he noticed in that kitchen was the final piece, and once you hear it, you can't pretend it was an accident anymore. Claire set the tray down like she was placing something sacred, not rushed, not clumsy, deliberate. The cup didn't rattle against the saucer. The steam rose evenly, curling toward my face. A chamomile always smelled harmless to me, soft, almost sleepy. The kind of thing doctors recommend when they want you calm. Claire smiled and pushed it closer. "You should drink it while it's hot," she said. "It works better that way." That was the first thing that felt wrong. I'd been drinking tea my whole life. No one ever talked about it working. Miguel lingered near the doorway, pretending to check the thermostat. His shoulders were stiff, his hands unmoving. He wasn't looking at Claire's face, he was looking at the cup. Claire kept talking about how the lawyer stuff must be stressful, about how proud she was of me for handling things so responsibly. She talked like someone filling space, like silence made her nervous. Then Miguel cleared his throat, a small sound, barely there. "Ma'am," he said. Claire turned, startled. "Oh, did you need something?" He ignored her. He stepped closer, slow enough that it didn't look like urgency unless you knew what to watch for. He leaned in just enough that only I could hear him. "Please," he whispered, "don't drink that." The room didn't freeze. Nothing dramatic happened. No music cue, no gasp, but something inside me shifted into place. I didn't ask why, I didn't react at all. I slid my saucer a few inches to the left like I was making room for paperwork. Claire, distracted by her phone buzzing on the counter, reached for the cup nearest her hand. She took a sip. I lifted the other cup and held it there just below my mouth. Let the steam fog my glasses, let the moment breathe. Miguel stepped back. Silent, watching, we talked about nothing, about the weather, about the roses in the back garden, about a neighbor's dog that barked too much. Claire laughed a little too loudly and drank again. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Her sentences started stretching, words dragging at the ends like they were heavier than they should have been. She blinked hard once, then twice, pressing her fingers to her temple. "You okay?" I asked. She waved a hand, just lightheaded. Must be the heat. She stood, and the world tilted. The chair scraped. Her knee hit the desk. One hand shot out, grabbing at air that wasn't there. The cup tipped, spilling across the papers she'd been so interested in earlier. Then she went down. Hard, Miguel moved instantly, kneeling beside her, calling her name. I stayed where I was, not frozen, anchored. My heart was pounding, but my head was clear in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Sirens came later, neighbors hovered. Michael arrived pale and shaking, asking questions no one answered directly. And all I could think was this: Miguel hadn't warned me because he guessed. He warned me because he'd seen something. And whatever he saw in that kitchen wasn't new. It had been building quietly, the same way Claire had. And now, whether she meant to or not, the clock had started ticking for everyone involved. The paramedics said it was a reaction. They didn't say to what, not yet. Claire came to while they were lifting her onto the stretcher. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. When she saw me standing there, upright, breathing normally, something flickered across her face. Not relief, calculation. Michael hovered, asking if she'd eaten, if she was dehydrated, if it could have been stress. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at her like she might vanish if he blinked. I told him I'd be fine. I always am. At the hospital, they ran tests, blood work, toxicology, questions that were framed gently but carried weight if you knew how to listen. What medications does she take? Was anything added to the drink? Did anyone else consume it? Miguel stayed quiet. I stayed quieter. Claire was admitted overnight for observation. The doctors said she'd be okay, but that something in her system didn't belong there. Something that shouldn't have been mixed with alcohol, caffeine, or tea. They said it like it was a mistake. I didn't correct them. Later that evening, after Michael left to stay with her, Miguel came back to the house. He stood in the kitchen, hat in his hands again, eyes rimmed red like he hadn't blinked all day. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something sooner." I told him to sit. He didn't. "She asked me to throw something out last week," he continued. "A little packet, said it was expired herbal supplement powder. She didn't want it in the trash inside." My stomach tightened. "What did it smell like?" I asked. He swallowed, bitter, sharp, not like herbs. He told me he'd looked it up later, not the brand, the ingredient list. "Something used to calm nerves, something that slows the heart if the dose is wrong, especially in older people, especially mixed into hot liquid." She asked if you ever felt dizzy, he said, if you drank tea all at once or slowly. I thought she was just worried. He finally met my eyes. Then I saw her stir the cup, long, careful, like she was counting. That was when he knew. That was why he spoke. "If you're still with me right now, tell me something. Would you have ignored that whisper? Be honest. Drop it in the comments." I read them. "And if stories where politeness hides danger hit a nerve for you, you might want to stay close. These situations don't announce themselves, they smile." That night I didn't sleep, not from fear, from clarity, because the tea wasn't the plan, it was the shortcut. And now that it had failed, Claire was still breathing, which meant the real fight hadn't even started yet. And next, I had to decide whether to stay silent or finish what paperwork had already begun. The next morning, I went to my attorney's office, not to panic, to document. Andrew had known me for years. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered a legal pad and silence, the kind that lets people say exactly what matters. I told him everything, slowly, in order, no embellishment, the tea, the whisper, the collapse, the questions Claire had been asking for months. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he folded his hands and said, "You did the right thing by not confronting anyone." That confirmed what I already knew. Accidents, he explained, are only accidents until patterns appear. You have a pattern. He asked me one question that stuck. Who benefits if you're not here to explain yourself? The answer didn't need saying. We amended the will that day, not dramatically, precisely. Contingencies, safeguards, temporary holds, independent executors. Medical decision clauses that removed anyone emotionally involved. I signed with a steady hand. Then I went home and changed the locks, not all of them, just enough. Claire was discharged that afternoon. Michael brought her back to their place. He called me once, voice tight, said the doctors thought it was an interaction. Stress. Supplements, nothing conclusive. He didn't ask if I was okay. That hurt more than I expected. Claire didn't call at all. Instead, she texted, "I'm so embarrassed about what happened. Thank you for staying calm. I hope I didn't scare you." The message read like an apology written by someone who'd rehearsed it. I replied with 2 words, "Rest well." That was it. Over the next few days, things shifted. Michael stopped stopping by. Claire stopped pretending. Miguel noticed a car parked down the street more than once, engine running, lights off. I didn't ask him to prove it. I asked him to write down dates. One afternoon, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a copy of a pharmacy receipt, not mine, Claire's name, a prescription filled weeks before the tea. The dosage circled in red ink, no note, no threat, just information. Someone else was watching now. And suddenly, the silence felt crowded. I realized something important then. Whatever Claire had intended, she hadn't expected to lose control of the timeline. People like her rely on things moving quietly, politely, without resistance. The moment something goes wrong, they scramble, and scrambling creates mistakes. That night, I made a decision I hadn't planned to make so soon. I called Michael. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "I'm making changes. You'll hear about them soon. I want you to know before anyone else does." There was a long pause, then he said, "Claire's been under a lot of stress." I answered evenly, "So have I." We hung up without resolving anything. But I wasn't looking for resolution anymore. I was looking for leverage, because if Claire thought the tea was her only move, she was about to learn how much damage paperwork can do when it's done by someone who understands timing better than poison ever could. The lawyer filed everything quietly. No notifications, no announcements, just sealed updates moving through the system the way they're supposed to when you don't want drama, just results. Claire didn't know yet, but she felt it. I could tell by the way she started hovering again, not in person, digitally, missed calls, casual texts, articles forwarded about family misunderstandings and how stress can mimic medical emergencies. Michael called once late. He sounded tired, not angry, not defensive, just worn thin. "She's been replaying that day over and over," he said. "She keeps saying she's scared something could have happened to you." I waited. "And?" I asked. "And maybe it would help if we all talked it through," he added. Together. There it was, the group conversation, the tidy bow, the version where everyone agrees nothing was intentional and moves on without asking questions that make people uncomfortable. I declined. I told him I wasn't ready. That wasn't a lie. Claire showed up unannounced 2 days later. Miguel saw her car before I did. He didn't say anything, just stayed nearby, trimming a hedge that didn't need trimming. Claire looked smaller than usual, paler. Her smile took effort. "I just wanted to check on you," she said, stepping inside like she still belonged there. "After everything." She glanced at the desk, the drawers, the cabinet that used to be unlocked. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked. I met her eyes. I am, she hesitated, then sat. I've been thinking a lot, she said, about how fragile life is, how quickly things can change. She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. I would never forgive myself if something happened to you, she continued softly, especially if it caused complications. There it was again, not grief, logistics. I asked her one question. What was in the tea? She froze. Just for half a second. Oh, she laughed lightly. Nothing special, just chamomile. I told the doctor everything. Did you? I asked. Her fingers tightened around mine. Of course. She stood soon after, said she should go. Said she didn't want to overstay. At the door she turned back. You trust me, don't you? She asked. I smiled. I trust records, I said. They last longer. She didn't smile back. That night my phone buzzed with a notification from my attorney. Temporary authority change confirmed. Medical, financial, all of it. If anything happened to me now, Claire wouldn't be making decisions. Michael wouldn't either, not without oversight. The power had shifted, and Claire knew it, because the next move she made wasn't polite at all. It was desperate, and desperate people don't wait patiently for tea. It started with the bank, not a call, a freeze. I was standing in the kitchen when my phone buzzed with a notification I didn't recognize, an attempted transfer. Large, flagged, declined. I hadn't moved money in weeks. I called immediately. The woman on the line was polite, efficient, and very clear. Someone attempted to access an account they're no longer authorized to manage. I asked who. She paused, then gave me the name. Claire. She'd used old credentials. Ones that used to work, ones she assumed still did. She hadn't known about the changes yet. I thanked the woman, hung up, and sat down slowly. So this was it. No tea, no pretending, straight to the money. I didn't call Michael. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the house they lived in, the one I'd helped with the down payment years ago, when things still felt normal. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Claire's car was in the driveway, so was another I didn't recognize. I waited. An hour later, a man came out carrying a slim folder. He didn't look like family. He looked like someone paid by the hour. Legal. She was moving faster now. That night, an email arrived from a firm I'd never heard of. A polite language, neutral tone, a request for clarification regarding future asset distribution expectations. I forwarded it to Andrew. His reply came back almost instantly. She's shopping for leverage. We're ahead of her. The next morning, Michael finally showed up. He looked older than he had a week ago, like someone who hadn't slept but also hadn't asked the right questions. Did you block Claire from the accounts? He asked. Yes, I said. She was just trying to help, he insisted. She thought I wouldn't notice, I said calmly. He flinched. She said you were confused, he added quietly, that the stress might be getting to you. That one landed. I stood and walked to the desk, opened the drawer, took out a folder I hadn't shown anyone yet. Inside were dates, times, copies, the pharmacy receipt, the attempted transfer, the attorney letter. I slid it across the table. Read, I said. He did, page by page. His shoulders sank. She said the tea was for you, he whispered, that she was scared you'd forget to eat. I closed the folder. Fear doesn't authorize accounts, I said. And concern doesn't come with dosage instructions. He didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at the wood grain like it might rearrange itself into something easier to accept. I need time, he said finally. So did I replied, and look how that turned out. He left without saying goodbye. Later that afternoon, Miguel knocked softly and handed me an envelope he'd found taped to the back gate. No name. Inside was a note written carefully. We can still fix this. Let's talk before this gets worse. No signature. I folded it once and set it aside. because when someone says before this gets worse, what they really mean is before you make it irreversible. And I was already deciding how final I wanted this to be. I didn't reply to the note. I let it sit where it was on the corner of my desk, under a paperweight I'd owned longer than Claire had known my name. Silence, when used correctly, does more damage than confrontation ever could. 2 days passed, then 3. Claire didn't come by again. She didn't text. She didn't call. That told me everything. People who believe they're entitled to something don't retreat unless they've hit a wall. Michael, however, did call. His voice sounded different this time, less defensive, more careful. She hired a lawyer, he said. She says it's just to protect herself. I almost laughed. From what? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, she thinks you're trying to cut me out. I closed my eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, from disappointment. I never had to cut you out, I said. You stepped back on your own. That hurt him. I could hear it. She keeps saying this is all a misunderstanding, he added. That Miguel exaggerated, that the bank thing was a mistake. And the dosage? I asked quietly. Silence. That wasn't a misunderstanding, I continued. That was preparation. He didn't argue anymore. That afternoon, Andrew called. Her attorney reached out, he said. They're fishing, testing what we know. And, I asked, and they're nervous. He paused. There's a toxicology report pending from the hospital, he added. Claire's blood work came back abnormal, not dangerous, but inconsistent with herbal tea. That was it, not proof of intent, but proof of presence. Something had been there. Something that didn't belong. I didn't feel relief. I felt something colder, heavier, because now, no matter how this ended, there was no version where we went back to how things were. That evening, I found Michael sitting in his car outside my house. Engine off, hands on the wheel, not coming in. I stepped out onto the porch. He looked up like a child caught somewhere he shouldn't be. I don't know who I married, he said finally, and I don't know how I didn't see this. I didn't comfort him. I raised you to notice details, I said. You just stopped looking. He nodded. Once. She says she's scared, he whispered. So was I replied, and I didn't put anything in anyone's cup. He broke then, quietly, shoulders shaking, no drama, just grief. I'm staying with a friend, he said. I need space. That's wise, I said. As he drove away, Miguel came up beside me. She won't stop, he said simply. People like her don't. I watched the road where my son had disappeared. No, I agreed. They just change tactics. Inside, I opened my desk drawer and took out the final envelope Andrew had prepared. The one I hadn't planned to use unless things went exactly this far. It was already addressed, already stamped. All it needed was a decision, and by morning I knew exactly what that decision would be, because some warnings come as whispers, others arrive as paperwork, and the last one I was about to deliver would be impossible to ignore. The envelope went out the next morning, certified, documented, impossible to pretend it didn't exist. By noon, Andrew confirmed it had been received. By evening, Claire called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail instead. Her voice was calm, too calm, the way people sound when they're trying to hold a story together with sheer willpower. This has gone far enough, she said. You're hurting Michael. Whatever misunderstanding happened, we can still fix this as a family. I deleted it, because families don't fix things with legal threats and altered bank access, and misunderstandings don't come with dosage instructions or contingency planning. 2 days later, the toxicology report was finalized. Nothing dramatic, no headline-worthy substance. Just enough of something sedative adjacent to confirm it had been intentionally added, not naturally present, not accidental, not benign. Andrew didn't sugarcoat it. If this ever escalates, he said, this document speaks louder than any story she tells. That was the point. Claire's attorney backed off shortly after. No follow-up letters, no more fishing. Silence, the kind that means someone realized the ground under them isn't solid. Michael came by one last time, not to argue, to sit. He looked smaller somehow. Like the version of him that used to ask questions had finally woken up and didn't like the answers. She admitted she was trying to protect our future, he said. Said she panicked. I nodded. That's what people say when they're caught planning, I replied. He swallowed hard. I moved out, he added. I'm staying with a friend. I didn't say good, I said I love you, and I meant it even then. He hugged me longer than he had in years. Claire never came back to the house. Miguel still trims the hedges every Thursday, still doesn't cross the threshold, still watches details most people miss. The will is finalized now, locked, witnessed. Untouchable, medical authority reassigned, financial control sealed, every loose end tied down quietly the way things should be. Sometimes people ask me if I was scared. I wasn't, I was insulted. Because I spent a lifetime learning how people hide their intentions behind manners, paperwork, and soft voices. And I refused to become another cautionary story whispered after the fact. If this story made you pause, even just for a second, say something below. I'm curious what part stayed with you. And if you don't want to miss stories where politeness turns dangerous, you already know what to do. Before you go, there's another story on my channel that still makes people message me weeks later. The one where I stayed quiet after a message that told me not to show up, and handled everything before anyone realized I'd moved at all. If this one hit home, that one will too. Sometimes the loudest power move is silence. And sometimes the smallest warning, a whisper, a look, a gardener who refuses to look away, saves you from signing away more than paperwork. I'm still here, and I still choose who gets a seat at my table and what goes in my cup.